One. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwick Dub.
This is Merps. Hope you guys are doing well in the arena. For the first time in what seems like a long time, actually, we don't have a ton of news. There was nothing, groundbreaking or earth-shattering that happened this week. We just got to play some arenas. Not saying we don't have anything to talk about, because we have lots.
Well, I mean, they announced the new patch that will change everything and fix Hearthstone forever.
It'll change everything. But all right, let's talk about it. So there are going to be balance changes, and surprise, surprise, like with all of the other balance changes before that, it is focused on constructed. So Blizzard is coming out with nerfs on 6 cards. Let's just go through them quickly.
So the changes are coming out Tuesday, and don't worry too much about it. It's not going to be a big deal in the arena. Just little points that you should keep in the back of your mind if you see these cards. Don't be fooled. Some of these cards have changed.
Right. So just FYI, Naga Sea Witch is now 8 mana instead of 5. That was not in the arena anyways.
It's a wild card.
Now let's go to and also Crystal Core, which is the rogue quest, which is also not in the arena. Now makes all of your minions 4/4s instead of 5/5s. So those are men. Let's toss those to the back and never think about them again. What we do see in the arena are the next 4 cards. Spiteful Summoner, which, just as a refresher, is currently a 6 mana 4/4 battlecry. Reveal a spell from your deck, summon a random minion with the same cost. It's a very controversial card. You can summon something huge, you can summon something not so huge. But now, starting on Tuesday, it will cost 7 instead of 6, which makes a pretty big difference. Are you still going to draft this in arena? Sometimes, yeah. But whatever swing you were hoping for, it comes out 1 turn later. It definitely hurts the card.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, before you needed it's summon a random minion with the cost, right? So you would need to summon a random minion of at least 3 mana cost.
3,
and that's fine. The average spell from your deck being 3 mana. Now the average spell from your deck has to be 4 mana, which can happen, but for most classes and most decks, it just won't be the case naturally. You'd have to make a dedicated big spell deck. So this makes it less enticing to make big spell decks, but that's fine. Big spell decks never really worked that well since Witchwood came along. It worked better before the rotation.
Right, but if you do have a big spell deck, if you have the double meteors with a pyroblast, with the flame strike, and you just don't have small cards, you still take this. This is a good card. But definitely got worse. Dark Pact is the next card. It's the Warlock spell. Currently, it is a 1 mana spell that says destroy a friendly minion, restore 8 health.
I hated this card.
Hero.
This card is basically designed to screw your opponent's expectations over. It's not a good card, but if your opponent it means whatever the heck your opponent was doing to pursue their strategy, you very much messed it up by playing this card, because 8 health is a lot.
8 health is a lot, and also 1 mana is very little. So they spend very little, and 1/1s are pretty plentiful right now, right, on the board.
Even not a 1/1, you just play any smallish minion and then you sacrifice it on the same turn, right? Who cares if it's a 2-card 4 mana card that says gain 8 health? If you need 8 health, especially as a warlock, it's more than worth it.
Yep, definitely. So it'll change, and on Tuesday, instead of gaining or restoring 8 health to your hero, you restore 4 health. So
it's awful now.
Made this card a lot worse, right? A lot worse.
Just in one of the ways that, and the tier list takes this very much into account, is that the same thing between reach and survivability is if you're dealing 3 damage to the face, let's say you call that 20 points. If you're dealing 6 damage to the face with the same card, that's not 40 points. That's not worth a lot more than 40 points, because when it comes to reach and survival, a lot of it is about your expectations and what your opponent does, because they'll make decisions to alter things based on that. So even though 6 is double 3, a reach card like Fireball that can deal 6 damage is very different than a reach card like Frostbolt that can deal 3 damage. It's more than twice as good for reach. And same with survivability. So cutting it down from 8 healing to 4 healing absolutely wrecks this card. It doesn't make the card half as good. it makes the card like, I don't know, maybe like a tenth as good as it was before.
Yep. So, that's the nerf to Dark Pact. Next, though, we stick to the same class, but we look at Possessed Lackey. Possessed Lackey currently is a 5-mana, 2/2 minion that has a Death Rattle, which is recruit a demon. This is a card that's seen a ton in Constructed to pull out Doomguards, to pull out Void Lords. But in Arena, you see it sometimes. It's recognized as not a terribly great card.
It's one of those synergy picks for a deck, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you have the right demons, you can afford to not take the other demons and take a Possessed Lackey or two and get some extra value, because they're not rated very highly.
Right. And now, with it being 6 from 5, man, you get that out a turn later, less flexibility. It definitely... it hurts.
You don't take it. You have to have a very highly synergized deck to take this card.
You had to have a very good reason to take it now, even. Yeah. Right? And because you not only need those big demons, you have to make sure you don't pull out like a small demon.
Right.
If you you just can't have Flame Imps, right?
No,
you can't have Flame Imps if you have this. You can't have Void Walkers if you have this. So.
Yeah, compare it to a Silver Vanguard, which is a near unplayable card in the Arena, which is a 7-mana 3/3. This is a 6-mana 2/2, so basically the same. And that one has Death Rattle, recruit a 8-cost minion, from your deck. So the issue with that is that you don't really have 8-cost minions in your deck. But even if you do, it's not a terribly great card. And that's where we're at now for demons, right? Even if you do have some large demons, okay, but you gotta only have them. Even if you pull out a Dread Inferno, it's not good.
Yeah, right? It's funny. Dread Inferno doesn't do anymore. You need the Void Lord or Doomguard.
Yep, it's Void Lord, Doomguard. That's it.
That's basically it. Yep. And lastly, we have an actual good card that people draft and people play to good effect in the Arena, which is Call to Arms. Call to Arms currently is a 4-mana Paladin spell that says recruit 3 minions that cost 2 or less. This is a top bucket card currently, but after Tuesday, it is going to cost 5 mana up from 4 mana.
And remember, it's probably still going to be in the same bucket. I don't think any of the bucketing is going to change with this patch unless they say it. So don't something we've learned in the last patch is that if they don't say they're rebucketing cards, they're not doing it. There was a whole micro adjust balance patch for Arena in the last patch, but none of the buckets moved, even though some of them, I think fairly obviously, should still be moving, even from an average player's perspective. They just didn't move because they didn't pull the trigger on the update. So if you see in the patch notes Arena classes have been cards have been rebucketed or something, then we're in a good spot. But otherwise, this is not. Don't assume that they're rebucketing any of these cards.
Yeah, and if they're not rebucketing any of them, then you just cannot pick Call to Arms anymore. Or don't pick Call to Arms after the patch comes out. Now, if you see it, if we're wrong and you see it getting paired up with Ironforge Rifleman, you're okay, I can think about it. But currently, it's going up against the best cards, right? People are taking it sometimes over Vine Cleavers, sometimes over Steeds. And
they
that's
shouldn't
fine.
For the most part, but they do.
It's fine if your deck, synergizes with it. And I've had some Paladins, use it to very good effect. But yeah, right now, 5 is really hard to swallow. So I would say if it is in the same bucket, it's a never pick. You just cannot pick it anymore.
So that's the new patch. Nothing terribly special. We sound pretty unenthused. It's not doing anything to the Arena, good or bad. Just kind of something to know if you're into the weeds in the Arena. And even if you don't really know it, they're not cards you play around or anything. And as long as you're drafting and actually looking at the card instead of just assuming that card is still what you think it is, you'll be fine.
Right.
What I want to talk about more this episode is to go into some other classes. So if you guys watch the Arena Coop, you'll notice that we messed up in the last Lightforge. We thought we were doing Hunter. We had a whole episode where half of it was about Hunter. And it turned out that wasn't actually the class we were supposed to play, and so we didn't play Hunter. You know, we don't get to choose the class we play in the Arena Coup. It was actually Druid, which was actually really good, because Druid is one of the best classes right now in the Arena since the patch. And I think a lot of people see it and see its heavy reliance on Ultimate Infestation, which is seen pretty frequently, and that's fair, right? Like, it's one of the best cards, if not the best card in the entire game, and you have more than a 50% chance of getting it in every single Druid deck, so, you know, you're going to end up with a pretty good deck. But even without Ultimate Infestation, Druids do pretty well in this new meta. Like, they've just been balanced in a way, and they always get balanced in this way, right? Like, whenever Blizzard does micro adjust, it's going to be done on the average player, which means classes are actually better to the extent that they're better for better players. And Druid historically has always been a class that's, you know, not terribly impressive looking, but good players have always, like almost all good players have done better with Druid than what you would expect, because it's basics and it's flexible and it does a little bit of everything. So if you know what you want in a Druid, if you know how you want to deal with a situation, you can shift things to your favor in a way where a lot of classes kind of just have to go with their game plan, right? Like, no matter what the situation is. So we ended up playing Druid, and spoiler alert, but we got 12 wins on the last run, and then in the last week I got a Druid without Ultimate Infestation, and that one went, I think, like 10, but it was like 10-1 or like 9-0, or I don't know. It was doing pretty well without Ultimate Infestation or any other good cards. It's just the flexibility with Druid is really easily seen right now. Anything you want to add about Druid? And the other class we'll actually talk about today, because we're going to play this class later today, is Priest, and we'll talk about that after Druid.
I think with Druids, it's kind of, if you just look at where Druids have been, their position in the meta historically. Whenever, like, typically what happens is Druids are very rarely / ever on top, right? Like, I can't remember any sustained period of time.
There was that period in KFT before they nerfed Druids. Like, they actually, like, changed the card values in Druid.
Right. But that was, like, a relatively short period of time, you know? Like, they never really had time to be on top, you know?
Yeah.
So whenever you get to this point, I think it's worth talking about, like, how does a class like Druid reach the top, right? And what prevented them from reaching the top in such a long time? Because we had plenty of classes have the top spot for a while, and a lot of it was just like, with Druid, it was mostly about decision making, and it's about choices, right? I mean, it's even in their cards, the choose one mechanic, right? So because choice, like situational flexibility, was one of their strengths, that doesn't lend itself to just raw power, right? Some other classes have dominated due to raw power in terms of raw power. Yeah, exactly. Raw power based on board, right? Their ability to snowball. Raw power based on initiative and value, like we had with the Firelines portals, right? But with Druid, I think it's kind of, there is a certain kind of danger as well. And if you just see a class like Druid potentially be the number, and right now it's not, we're not at that point, because it's not like, by far number one, and it's reflected in the win rate and nothing comes close. But if we ever get there, I think that's like super dangerous, because it just shows like a class like Druid is not really supposed to own the top spot. If you look at general win rates, and this is obviously contrasted with your assessment that, like, well, better players have always been better with Druid, and that just makes sense, right? That makes sense. But I will say, if we keep on going down this path and we see that the general population does well with Druid, that means Druid is like super OP, right? If the general
everybody got better at this game.
Okay. Like, if everyone, basically, if the general stats say Pouna is number one, I'm like, that's totally expected, right? same thing with Mage.
Yeah,
But
I don't know. I worry when Mage is number one. I like the meta when Mage is number
yeah,
one, but Mage has a lot of like tricks that like it's very much easy. It's very easy to distinguish between a good Mage player and a bad Mage player. I think like just playing against them, and
that's true.
I like to
That's
think
true.
that it
Yeah.
matters a little in the win rates. So,
But with Druid, it's definitely one of those classes in which, if you just look at the foundation, the construction
yeah,
of the class, it's a class that doesn't lend itself to taking the top spot for the general
yeah,
population. So
that's what happens when you focus on balance.
yeah, it's an interesting time just because if you really think about it, you're like, wait, we haven't really seen Druid at the top for everyone, the masses. And then if you just dig into it, you're like, that makes sense.
Yeah,
they kind of shouldn't.
yeah. I mean, classes. There's certain classes that, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to talk more about that. I think the point is made. Let's actually. I want to dig in about like substance, like on the ground, how to draft as a druid, because like we said, right,
Yeah.
we've been focused on this since 10.4 came out. Your draft is your destiny now. Gameplay matters less than it's ever mattered before in the entire history of Hearthstone. And draft matters more than it's ever mattered. And people really don't know how to draft. Like, a lot of even good players are a little shaky on the draft, still trying to figure it out. It's still kind of new. So here's some thoughts that I've had about how to draft druids. And again, every one of these classes presents you with like this different puzzle to solve about how to draft, right? And how to flexibly draft. There are certain known archetypes of every deck that kind of work, some better than others, but no one knows the exact odds that you can like fit your deck into one of these archetypes. No one knows like the exact choices that need to be made. Let's say it's your 20th pick and you need to go down one route or maybe hedge on your curve. Like all this stuff is going by feel right now. But Druid presents the very interesting situation where even more than Paladins, which you might think, oh, Paladin Steed, but Paladins also have Vine Cleaver, Aldor, and all sorts of stuff. Druid has UI and then a bunch of like, not even a lot of cards, like very few cards actually in the top bucket. And they're not very good. I mean, they're good, but they're not like the game changers that something like a Steed or a Vine Cleaver is, right? Like your other top cards besides Ultimate Infestation, the top bucket for Druid is Ancient of War, Swipe, and Tortolan Forager. Now,
Yep.
Crypt makes fun of Tortolan Forager. We at the Lightforge have always rated Tortolan Forager as one of the top Druid cards because of the 2-drop ability and the ability to get good card advantage on it. It's Pyros-like, right? It's like mini Pyros. But still, right, like there's a big drop-off between Ultimate Infestation and Tortolan Forager. Like a really big drop-off. Like they should not be within like 5 tiers of each other. But because this is the top tier, you can't put Ultimate Infestation in its own tier, so you get kind of this result. And that's why every single deck almost has a Ultimate Infestation. And when that happens, you have to draft with Ultimate Infestation in mind. Because of the way the drafting works now in Hearthstone, if there is a card in one of the top 2 buckets that you will always pick if you get it because it's so misbucketed, and here it's not even misbucketed, it's just the way the bucketing system works that makes it an auto pick, even though it's been put in the highest bucket, then you have to build your entire deck always, at least in the first like X number of picks, with this card in mind. Now, when I get to around pick 20 and I still don't have an Ultimate Infestation, that's when I start hedging. And because I built my deck already with Ultimate Infestation in mind, when I start hedging, that means I'm taking the cards that are kind of like Ultimate Infestation but worse. And the good part about Druids is that these cards are all under-bucketed. And they're under-bucketed for a very good reason. It's because players take this card with Ultimate Infestation, right? And then they're not as good.
Yeah.
And the cards I'm talking about specifically are Nourish, which is in the 5th bucket, and Branching Paths, which is in the 4th bucket. Both of these cards are significantly higher than the buckets they've been put into if you have a deck without Ultimate Infestation. And even if you have a deck with Ultimate Infestation, they're fine cards. They're just like properly bucketed, probably. So starting around pick 20, you go into your backup plan if you don't have a UI yet, which is to take Nourish and Branching Paths as much as you can. Even before that, you could take one of them, right? Just to like hedge a little. Especially if you're a good player and you want to keep your average up. If you're just kind of trying to roll for 12, you don't really have to. But these things that exist as backup options. It really reminds you of Rogue, right? This very similar concept where Rogue has Sprint, Rogue has Pickpocket, Rogue has, I'm blanking on the card's name, Thistletea, right? And then Rogue also has the Bard. What's the guy's name? The draw card
Elven
bard,
Minstrel.
Elven Minstrel, yeah.
Draw card bard.
The draw card bard for Rogue, yeah. So you have a bunch of cards that give you this like very significant card advantage, and that gives you a lot of consistency in your drafts to be able to draft in that archetype where you do a lot of stuff early and then you draw cards to kind of keep your sustain going. And what do I mean by an Ultimate Infestation deck? Like, how do you draft with Ultimate Infestation in mind? You don't really only have to do one thing. Well, two things are better, but the one thing you absolutely have to do is you want to empty out your hand as much as possible, right? So you want your entire curve. You want a lower curve as much as possible. And unlike the Rogue, which has a dagger for turn 2, you don't have that. So you need actual 2-drops as the Druid, which works really well with UI, because when you get actual 2-drops, your deck is a little thinner than you kind of want it. And then, lo and behold, here are all these great cards between Ultimate Infestation and Nourish and Branching Paths that kind of give you your card advantage back. So it kind of fits into this mold. And this is a mold that like almost every single Druid draft that's successful is going to fall under because of the way the bucketing system works.
Yeah, and it also helps that Druids just have really good 2-drops in general, right?
Very premium 2-drops. In fact, in their second bucket, they have 2 of their cards as 2-drops, and in their first bucket, Tortolan Forager, you know, if you, I don't know, somehow end up stuck with it, is also a 2-dropped. It's not seen. This is not the case in any other class.
Yeah. So this is a situation in which you're kind of forced to take 2s, but thankfully you have a class with really good 2s. I also want to point out, you listed Nourish and also
Branching Paths
as 2 cards. We also have Starfire, right? Starfire is in the 4th bucket as well, and that's up against cards like Ironbark Protector, Verdant Longneck, Ironwood Golem. It's also in there with Starfall, which we really like Starfall, but like if by pick 20 you don't really have Ultimate Infestation, Starfire is it's like a mini or like Ultimate Infestation light, right? And then a lot of the times you're going to be picking Starfire, and like I think of Starfire like fairly highly, so that's another one of those value picks that you can make, which also just shows how well set up Druid is. Like you pick Ultimate Infestation, and then if you kind of if you're on the path to not getting it,
you're fine. You're totally fine.
And if you think back to our deck last week, right? In terms of we totally built it towards Ultimate Infestation.
And we had an Ultimate Infestation, right? Yeah. And we had a Deathwing too. Like we had the setup.
Right. So this is going a little bit like basically we had the Ultimate Infestation. I think it was the first pick, right? And we picked appropriately after that. But if you just look at the games, it's not as though when we say you build your deck towards Ultimate Infestation, it's not like in every game you either draw it or you lose. I think we only even played Ultimate Infestation in like 4 games, maybe even 3
games,
and in 2 of those games it was a Mind Blast, essentially.
No, we played it in 5 games. In 2 of the games it was a Mind Blast, and 3 of the games it like helped, but maybe a Starfire would have been similar, right? Like
right. Yeah, exactly. So you can build your deck like that, and it's not as though you have singled out Ultimate Infestation as your win condition. It is just another thing to back up your general strategy.
Your general strategy is to curve out, spread out, buff everything, and I'll get into the buff everything part, and then use your taunt armor synergies, and then draw cards for card advantage in the later part of the game to reload. It's a very safe strategy because you're curving out, so you have initiative from being on the board. You have a lot of taunts to protect your board, so you get the good trades for the most part. And you also have armor on top of that. It destroys all kinds of aggro and mid-range play. Like, you just own aggro and mid-range. You can only lose to control and like card advantage like base decks. And with those decks, you can sometimes you can out control them, especially if you draw UI. You can definitely out card advantage them if you draw UI, and even if you don't, you'll probably end up with some cards, because remember, you're building a deck that kind of has the best of both worlds. You have a curve and a lot of small things, and you also have card advantage. So you have Savage Roar that's functional if you're like facing against a control deck or something and they don't clear your board for one turn. Well, Savage Roar, 15 damage on your opponent's face. Now they're a little screwed. Ultimate Infestation is Reach, right? Like, the Druids are so flexible because of this. And it's kind of sad that because of Ultimate Infestation's existence and the way the meta is shaping up, there's just kind of one correct way to draft Druid. Like, you don't really get a lot of variety in the big picture, in the archetype picture. But within every draft, there's some like subtle variances that could kind of get you a slim edge. And one of the edges, and one that we used last week, is with the taunt synergies. Taunts are very plentiful in Druids, and they have this great card called Strong Shell Scavenger, which is misbucketed in the 5th bucket. It's misbucketed because people probably don't use it terribly correctly, because it's a difficult card to know when to use, when to hold, when to do whatever. And it's technically a synergy card, although the synergy is with taunts, and Druids have so many taunts. You don't need, like, I know everyone's like looking for that combo with I always forget this card's name. Spreading Plague. With Spreading Plague and Strong Shell Defender, but you don't need that. Strong Shell Defender is good if you get it to hit one target. It's great if you get it to hit any 2 targets, even if one of the targets you play on the same turn. Like, you definitely don't need it to hit like 3/1/5 taunts for it to be like a great card. And being in the 5th bucket is pretty crappy, all right? 5th bucket is with like Elder Longnecks. I think, like, at least for Druid, a lot of the 5th bucket class cards are misbucketed. Like, this is like Savage Roar is here, Strong Shell Scavenger is here, Nourish is here, Whispering Woods is here. Like, that's how bad Blizzard thinks of these cards, or how good they think Whispering Woods is. Don't take Whispering Woods ever. So that is that's one of the ways you can go. And remember, these are not, it's not like, oh, I'm a taunt synergy Druid now. No, you're still a Druid that spreads out and then, you know, draws cards later on. Like, you're still a very balanced Druid, but now you have additional value from taunt. Or you can get additional value from armor. Armor cards in Druid aren't really under-bucketed. They're slightly over-bucketed, if anything, but the Spellstone itself is under-bucketed. So whether you go the armor route or not really depends on how many Spellstones you get early. Spellstone's in the 3rd bucket. It should be in the 1st bucket. 2nd bucket, like, lowest. And it's not surprising. It's a hard card to use because you can hero power 3 times to buff your Spellstone once. And I feel like that's the way you buff, like, Spellstones half the time. But that's got to be a really difficult decision to make, right? Like, when you fit those 3 hero powers in. When you just say, screw it, and use the Spellstone as a 1 mana, 2 damage card. And so it's going to not have the win rates when Blizzard looks at it. And so it's going to be lower bucketed. And that's where you extract value. One of the keys with Druid is that the average player, misplays Druid so hard because there's so many decisions to make in Druid that almost all of the cards, even if they're like a little bit tricky, they're under bucketed. And so you want to really lean into that when you play Druid.
Yeah, and it also makes sense that the top bucketed cards are kind of, you know, they're powerful, right? But they don't require too much decision making, right? Ultimate Infestation, as long as you survive to it, you're good, right? Like, it'll bail you out. Swipe, right? Just a generally very good card. But yeah, I mean, you have all these cards that can be very powerful in the right hands, either just by decision making or something like Savage Roar in the 5th bucket, right? You can just have a deck or identify the fact that, wow, like, now is the time to use it. And it's like you said last week, all you need is basically 1 minion on the board to get like somewhat even value for it, right? 3 mana for 4 damage split up. So yeah, just looking at the list for Druid, I definitely have to agree. A lot of potential, a lot of opportunities to have all of these picks in which you outgain other people who are drafting, right? Because the game sort of the PvP aspect of it begins in the draft immediately, and who can accumulate the most value, the most synergy. I shouldn't say value because that's a little bit, you know, inappropriate for this conversation. But the person who can get the most advantage in the draft relative to their opponent goes into the first game, and you know, so on, with a huge advantage. And Druid, you know, you have so many opportunities in these picks because of the bucketing system to just immediately get all these small advantages, and then you go in and yeah, like you're like, even before you play anything, you're like a huge favorite to win. Yep. Because you've accumulated all of this advantage with all of these picks.
Yeah. And one of the specific synergies that you could be trying to accumulate advantage for that I want to caution against is the 4 mana or below one.
Yeah.
The 4 mana or below one is usually, I mean, there's Oaken Summon, so it kind of links into the armor synergy as well. But it's mostly anchored by Grizzled Guardian, which is in the 4th bucket, which is a pretty low bucket for Grizzled Guardian as a card. So there is a path for that, but keep in mind that because you need to go small and wide and tokeny, Grizzled Guardian locks you out of a lot of things you want to do. So you better have like a lot of Power of the Wilds, because those aren't minions, right? Those are spells. So you can have Power of the Wilds and still have 2-drops, but they're not 2-drops that you get to pull out. Like, you better not take any of your choose one minions, such as Druid of the Scythe, Druid of the Swarm, like a Shell Shifter even, right? A Shell Shifter is just a 3/3. It's no longer like the good 4-drops that you want. And Druids just don't have a lot of 4-drops you pull with Grizzled Guardian. So I wouldn't go for a Grizzled Guardian deck. I've tried it a couple times. It's never worked out for me. On the other hand, if your draft looks like it's okay for a Grizzled Guardian, take the value there. Like, it's one of those cards where it is a little lower than I think where it should be, but trying to fit an entire deck around it is very difficult because you're trying to create an ultimate infestation deck.
Yeah, and that's the most important thing. When you are drafting Druid, it's all about ultimate infestation. You assume you're going to get it because you are pretty much going to get it. And it's such a powerful card, but it also requires you to really just devote your deck to it, right? And it's worth it. Like, you should devote your deck to it because it's so worth it. Unfortunately, it really does limit the creativity whenever you draft a Druid. And you can contrast that with like the Rogue, right? And we've talked about that. And the Rogue, I think this is like the exact opposite, in which if you look at the top bucket, they have plenty of good top class cards in the top bucket that can take you in different directions, right? You know, Backstab versus Vilespine Slayer.
Oh, it's huge difference.
Huge difference, right? Faldori Strider, which favors you playing, 5-10 turns down the road, right? Like, the longer you can delay with Faldori Strider, the better it is, the more spiders you're going to get out of it. So something like Rogue, you have that choice, and you know that, like, oh, well, I can go super aggressive, which, I've been watching some of Shady streams, and I've seen that he's done very well with super aggro Rogue, right? And, I think you and Shady have proven that, sort of the very control-y, the sort of removal type Rogue also works very well. But unfortunately, when we talk about Druid, there is right now only one way to do it.
Now, it's a very good way, though.
It's a very good way. Oh, yeah.
I think it's the most consistent archetype you can build in the entire arena right now.
This is also, whenever you have a situation like this, it's such an advantage, right? And we talked about it for like the Firelands Portal meta as well. It's like you go into the Mage Draft, you know what you're going to get, essentially. And that level of comfort, you might not realize it, but it does help each one of your picks, right? And here we're specifically telling you, it's like, okay, draft low. You don't need to get like the super card draws because you're going to get Ultimate Infestation. But
what do you mean the super card draws? You do need to draft the super card draws.
No,
That's the whole point of the deck.
No, like, you don't need to pick the nourishes in the beginning. Sorry,
right. Okay.
Yeah, you don't need to pick like.
I'm more thinking you don't need to pick the large minions in the beginning because you don't need card advantage that way.
Well, like if you're faced with like a Boulder Fist Ogre, right? You're like, no, I want like the twos, the threes, the
Hmm.
initiatives, like all of
It
that
frees
stuff.
up your drafting so much because you don't have to
It
take the
does.
larger minis, you don't have to take the larger spells. You only take them when they're like very good, right? Or your other options are
Right.
very bad. And
I
you'll
think with
eventually
deck,
be bailed out by Nourish, by like Ultimate Infestation, by Branching Paths.
I don't remember our deck specifically last week, but it was like it was UI, and then it was also Deathwing, which, if you think about it, is like very similar, right?
Hmm.
It like very super late game card. You need to empty out your hand before you play it. Well, with UI, you don't have to empty out your hand, but like pretty similar. And the rest of our deck was very like very lean, and I don't know if we had any cards above 5 mana, maybe just like two.
No, I don't remember, but yeah, very very few.
Yeah,
We have few cards. I mean, you should
something like
never have
that.
too many cards above 5 mana as the druid. You start taking more of those
Yeah.
cards if you realize you're not going to get UI. But if you ever have a UI in your deck, like you shouldn't. You should have like one volcano sword, maybe one the worm, and then you're done. Like pick your curve cards, pick your smaller cards. They're gonna be pick utility cards. Like they're all gonna be better than like large bulky minions.
Hmm. Yep.
Okay, well, that's Druid. I think Druid is one of the strongest classes in the meta right now. Like maybe just behind Rogue. I'm not terribly sold on Paladins after the hotfix. Like I know the win rates are still high, but like having played some Paladins and having seen some Paladins in the mid wins range, like Paladins are very deck dependent, right? And they're very like luck dependent in terms of whether you get your buff cards at the right time. And you just there's not much you can do as a player to affect that. And on the other hand, for Druid, there's so much you can do as a player to affect the outcome, both in your draft and your in your gameplay. And I don't
Yeah.
mean that it's like terribly difficult to do gameplay as a Druid, but there is some amount of difficulty, right? And that like
Yep.
some amount of difficulty is going to skew the win rate so much, but for average versus like what I call the true win rate, meaning from the perspective of a good player.
Agreed.
Okay, so what we're gonna do today is we're gonna play Priest afterwards. So we're gonna keep talking, and we're gonna talk about Priest. I think these when we're in this bucketing system, you just have to talk buckets, right? You have to keep going down the buckets. You have to keep looking at the buckets and talk about buckets, and it's really worth it to do it for every single class. But it also takes a lot of time, so we can't go over everything. We've done what Paladin, we've done Rogue, we've done Hunter, we just did Druid. We're gonna do Priest now, and hopefully we'll finish the other classes up in the later episodes. But one of the things that happened with Priest is that they changed so much with Witchwood coming out in their whole archetype. It's probably the only class that had a giant change in fundamentally in what its archetype is about. And that's because it went back to what it used to be about. It used to be about controlling the board and then starting to buff your minions. And then in the last year, it started becoming about playing this like really, really heavy control game with so many different answers that can answer you at every stage of the game, and then eventually just like winning out of attrition. And now all like the vast majority of those cards are gone. So Priest is right back where they were, which is you want to be on the board. So many cards for the Priest reward you for being on the board. And as usual, there's not that many ways for Priest to actually get on the board. So what you definitely need, the number one thing that you need for the Priest, and we talked about this in the Druid, but it's easy to do in the Druid. It's not easy to do this in the Priest, but you need to do it. Curve out. 1, 2 drops. You got to get at least 6. I think that is very, very important for a stable Priest. If you start out with a lot of control cards, maybe you don't need to do this. But if you're just drafting a general deck with like an average amount of like board clears and like Shadow Madnesses and whatnot, then you need your 1 and 2 drops. You can even look at the win rates, like, and especially if you're like a less good, like if you're average or like a slightly above average player, then you really need these drops because they're like the easier way to play. Like just in terms of win rates, right? Your 2-drop win rates in Priest is so insanely high compared to other classes. Like Priests just need 2 drops because you need to always be on the board, and there's not a lot of cards that flip the board for you. The big one that people keep pointing at is Psychic Scream, which is still a great card, but it never flips the board. It just resets the board. right? It's good for attrition because you hope your opponents run out of like stuff to do, but you're not flipping the board like that. You're just getting rid of. You're just wiping the whole board on both sides.
Yeah. Priests have lost. They have lost so many of the tools that they relied upon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people are still trying to play in that way, but you're missing the Potion of Madness, right? Which is an actual flip card.
Mm-hmm.
They're missing Potion of Madness, and they're also just missing the good clears as well. Like no more Dragonfire Potion, and then they're just missing like so many power cards, and it's weird because before you could totally get away with just playing the annoying priest that had so much value, but drafted 2 Potion of Madnesses.
Yeah, and
right?
no 2-drops.
Yeah, no 2-drops. Because that thins out your deck, and it's like, oh, why would I draft that when I have Potion of Madnesses and I can just take another free from Amber, right?
Yeah.
So, but now you definitely can't. One of your strongest cards as well is the Elixir, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in order to have the Elixir, what do you need? You need stuff on the board. And I have seen aggro priests on.
They're not bad.
They're not bad.
One of the things with this meta that I don't think it's said enough, but I think it's that it's pretty thin decks. The games go on for a long time, but there's really not. I think that's because the game's gotten a lot more complicated, just in general, in terms of like trying to figure out what your moves are. But that's why it's like taking longer. People are just taking longer turns, not necessarily that the meaningful turns are really extended. But like, there's not a lot of decks out there that have these like insane ability to sustain that they used to, like that we're used to over the course of the last year since like Ungoro. And so instead, if you just have a couple of cards that are sustain, you're fine, especially if you're priest and you get the board. Well, then your hero power is the best sustain outside of Warlock, right? Like in the entire game. So you can just get card advantage from your hero power. You don't even need like cards that draw stuff. But when it comes to priest, one of the these are some of the best cards in priest right now. Mind Control, Devour Mind. Why? Because they do a lot of stuff. A Mind Control is effectively like 3 cards worth in one go. Devour Mind literally gives you 3 cards in one go. Like, depending on the meta, they may be better or like worse, but in this particular meta, the same way we're talking about Druids and Ultimate Infestation, the same way we're talking about Rogues and all the sustain, you can do the same thing with Priest. And again, why do you want to do it, right? You don't just want to fall in the trap of saying like, oh, if I can get on the board, I get on the board. Like sometimes it's not like like absolutely necessary to get on the board. Like I think Mage right now is not absolutely necessary to get on the board. But when it comes to Priest, so many of your good cards, your Temple Enforcers, your Unidentified Elixir. By the way, Temple Enforcer is in the 3rd bucket. Unidentified Elixir is in the 4th bucket. Northshard Cleric and Holy Nova are both in the 2nd bucket. That's right, Holy Nova is in the 2nd bucket, not the 1st bucket. Like, I always look at Holy Nova as the game-winning cards in my Priest draft. Just for that 1 bucket difference. Like, in this meta, Holy Nova should be a top bucket card. But it's not. And every time I see a Holy Nova, unless I desperately need a curve card somewhere, I take a Holy Nova. It's one of the few board clears that priests have left, and it favors you being on the board, actually. Like, a lot of people say a lot of good things about Psychic Scream, but that's in the very 1st bucket, and it does not favor you being on the board. And your whole game plan should be to be on the board. So it's more of a oh crap kind of card, and less of a works all the time kind of card, which is what you want, especially if you created a good deck, right? The worse your deck is, the more your Psychic Scream is going to be useful.
Yeah, it's interesting now. Not saying that Psychic Scream is bad by any means, but it definitely goes against your strategy a little bit, and you definitely don't want to be relying on it, right? So if you're on the board, you don't really want Psychic Scream, but it's not like in the previous metas in which Psychic Scream was so good, because even if you didn't draw it, you still had Dragonfire Potion, right? So you could sort of fall back on these, and then if you didn't have Dragonfire
Potion, you have no
Potion,
fallbacks on Psychic Scream. You need like 2 of these in your deck or something, at least.
Yeah, you need 2 of these in your deck because it's not interchangeable with any other AoE at all. So the closest thing would be a Duskbreaker, but man, it is much
Dustbreaker's in the
harder.
first bucket.
Yeah, it's in the first bucket as well. So
Don't
it's
ever
going
take a
against.
Dustbreaker. Like, you better have a lot of dragons already to even think about it.
Yeah,
Like, it's not gonna, it shouldn't happen.
right. So it's definitely tougher to rely on that Psychic Scream now for so many reasons. Um, and with all of their like with all the options that priests have in the second bucket as well, you have the Holy Nova, you have the Northshire Cleric, you have the Shadow Ascendant, right? I
I'm
see.
so low on the Shadow Ascendant right now. I think it's a trap card. I don't think anybody should take a Shadow Ascendant unless you're actually an aggro priest, as in you have like 10 1/2s and then another 6 3 drops.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it's over bucketed to begin with a little bit, but like most 2 drops are. But on top of that, it's not actually like a curve card necessarily. Like, it's kind of a curve card. It's in that weird category.
Yeah, definitely.
And you're skipping out. Like, this, the second bucket has 4 priest cards and then 5 neutral cards. Like, if you're taking a Shadow Ascended, you're likely missing out on really good cards like Stonehill Defender, Stoneskin Basilisk, Hildnir Frost Riders, Fireplume Phoenixes, Northshire Clerics, Holy Novas, even a Nightscale Matriarch. Like, you're missing out on these cards to get your Shadow Ascended. It's just not worth it. And you're always missing out on at least one of these cards. So the only time you take Shadow Ascended is if you desperately need a 2-drop to get to the 6 2-drops we were talking about, because you just weren't offered enough regular 2-drops, which happens, right? And having
Which
2-drops
happens,
is so important that you should be doing that. But never take it if you have any other choice. Like, that's I think it's such a trap right now in the drafting.
Right. I mean, what I want to say was the second bucket is sort of like your tempo bucket, right? Because not only do you have the Cleric, Shadow Ascendant, you have your Fireplume Phoenix, you have your Hildnir Frost Rider. I find that whenever I draft Priest, and I've only had 2 drafts so far, but yeah, this is the bucket that I'm especially looking for, right? Like, not saying that I'm sad with the first bucket and drafting Shadow or Death or Free from Amber, but of all of the powerful sort of tempo tools or just the clears that I need, it's typically in the second bucket, right? Like, I want that Hildnir Frost Rider so that it has a good chance of sticking past that turn, and then I can elixir, right? It's also got Stoneskin Basilisk, which is just really good. All these things that just help you take the board, or the Cleric, in which after I've taken the board, now it's time to cash in with the Cleric, right?
Yeah.
So
Priest is not, and you'll see these traps everywhere. I think, in Priest drafts, because Priest can go in many different ways, but a lot of the ways are much more inconsistent than your normal way of being on the board and then trying to buff your minions. And that includes, I just think of all these as traps for Priests. Coffin Crashers is way too high. You're just not going to get enough Death Rattle minions, or to the extent that you do, you have to give up so much value, and it's not even that good. You still lose the card from your hand, even when it comes out. It's just, I never go for that. I don't think that's a way to win consistently. Like I said, Shadow Ascendant is over bucketed unless you absolutely need a 2. Dragons are all over bucketed. You don't see that many dragons anymore normally, and you just don't need it to win. Why do something like that?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you need that kind of swing if you're an average player to get a very well synergized deck and go on that 10 win, 12 win tear. But if you're a good player, you don't need that. You just need to get on the board, intelligently use your buffing and your healing, and then you're fine. And you can do that in almost every Priest draft. Whereas the other ones, you try to go for it, it's gonna backfire at least half the time. And very rarely will you be naturally led down any of these paths. Maybe 1 out of 10 times.
Right. This is synergy picks, right? This is essentially synergy picks, but now it's even more crushing than before, because with synergy picks before, you picked against other synergy cards. That's fine, but now if you're taking the Duskbreaker over the Shadow or Death, if you're taking it over the Free from Amber or Mind Control,
what are you doing?
Yeah,
you're not getting value.
Yeah, you're saying I'm taking this huge hit here from just a normally premium card, and this is going to work out. If it doesn't work out, like you know, the field, right? Them taking from their top bucket at the time that you take it, they already gained such an advantage over you, and you have to recoup that somehow. So it is synergy picks, but like with much higher stakes.
That's the difference, right? Like, synergy picks are fine, but they have to be consistent. Like, mages with elementals, like druids with armor, or in particular with taunt. They have to be very, very consistent. Like, that makes the synergy picks worth it. And especially in the 10.4 buckets model, where you get, like, you won't lose too much value on these things, you can really go for synergy picks. I've always advised going for synergy picks, but not with priests. Priests are overtuned when it comes to the synergies in a bad way. Everything's over bucketed, like severely over bucketed, when it comes to anything that has anything to do with synergy. I don't know, and I think part of it is because when these synergies work out, they make really insanely great priest decks that no one can beat. And so the average win rates for that is going to go up, and people are attracted to that, so they like try for it. Maybe, I don't know. But when it comes to someone who wants to get an average win rate that is high and use priests, it's not the way to go.
Yeah.
You don't need the highs, and the lows come way too frequently when it comes to drafting, and you can't mitigate the lows. Like, if you have a Duskbreaker instead of a Mind Control, and you don't have a dragon in your hand, what are you, like, that's such a huge difference. That's not something you recover from, even as a good player. On the other hand, if you have, like, a Mind Control or a Psychic Scream, let's say Psychic Scream is probably closer to Duskbreaker. If you have a Psychic Scream instead of a Duskbreaker, even if you could have triggered the Duskbreaker, the chances that you needed that extra tempo from the Duskbreaker is probably not that high. Like, you can quote-unquote recover with your Psychic Scream.
Yeah. So right now with Priest, and also what you want to do is when you look at synergies, right? Not only do you look at the availability, you look at the arbitrage there. Like, if a good portion of the synergy package is under bucketed, like that's also a good also a good opportunity for you there, right? But yeah, it's like Duskbreaker is in the very top bucket. Nightscale, Matriarch is in the second bucket with all of those other really good cards that we talked about, right? The ones that are going to be the value picks are going to be like Bone Drake in the fourth bucket. That's pretty good. But like, how many Bone Drakes are you going to have, right?
Yeah.
And you can't go down this path saying I'm going to get the Bone Drakes. Like, if you
Bone Drakes are a neutral minion. You're not going to see them anywhere near as often as you see. Like, you may feel like you see them all the time, but that's only because your mind is always drawn to it because it's an under-bucketed card.
Yeah. So that's kind of Priest for you.
Yeah.
I've been aggroed down by Priest quite a few times. It's it works if you've been used to the pre-Witchwood Priest, you gotta change significantly. You can still have those late game cards, right? Like, Mind Control is still fine. Free from Amber is still really, really good. You just need actual early game tools now and minions. You can't just cheese your way into a win because you have Potion of Madnesses, which I appreciate, right? Like, play fair. Don't just pick completely greedy and then have 2 Potion of Madnesses and say like, okay, that's good. I beat everyone. It's like, there's no punish for that. You outvalue everyone, and if some hunter, me, goes up against you, you just double Potion of Madness them, and then they lose automatically.
Before we end our discussion on Priest, I want to point out one way in which the entire Priest draft is warped. We talked about how Ultimate Infestation warps the Druid drafts. We talked about when we were dealing with like Paladins about how Silver Sword warps the entire Paladin draft. So Priest has the dubious distinction of having all of their removals in the top bucket. Outside of the top bucket, every single bucket has exactly one decent removal. And that's it. Like, tempo-wise, a decent removal, and that's it. And the 6th bucket doesn't even have any removal. You have Holy Nova in the 2nd bucket. Okay, the 3rd bucket has both Pain and Shadow Madness. So that's something. Shadow Visions, if you count that, that's in the 4th bucket. Spirit Lash is in the 5th bucket. Holy Smite is in the 7th bucket. By the way, pick your Holy Smites. I don't know why it's so lowly bucketed, but it's better than that. And everything else is stuck in this top bucket. So if you're sitting around as a priest and you want to get your initiative from your other buckets, you're not going to get that many initiative from your other buckets. Or if you're like dead set on it, you're like, I have to pick every Holy Nova I get. Well, no, you're not going to get any like Northshire Clerics or Nightscale Matriarchs or Basilisk or Stonehill Defenders because they're in the same bucket, right? If you know you're going to take every Shadow Word Pain, no, you're not going to get all that many Auchenized Soul Priests or Crystalline Oracles, right? Like, which are great cards. So what I always advise when it comes to the priest is when you get a top bucket, you take the removals. So Free from Amber may look enticing, Cabal Shadow Priest may look really enticing, and you remember those like games in which either you're absolutely ruined or you absolutely win based on it. But Cabal Shadow Priest is a little RNG, like because of that. Free from Amber is definitely literal RNG. And they're all just like Obsidian Statute, also somewhat RNG. And they're not removals.
No.
And what you need as a priest are more removals because you're always going to want more initiative because the rest of your draft doesn't have enough initiative. So when you see a top bucket, like this is one more thing that I mean about the weirdness of the priest draft and how many traps there are. Don't take the Shadow Ascendants unless you're desperate. Don't take the Obsidian Statues, the Free from Ambers, the Cabal Shadow Priest unless you already have your initiative cards in place. Because this is the bucket to take the initiative of the cards. Like, maybe you don't like, I don't know, let's say Psychic Scream as much as other people do. Maybe you don't think Shadow Word Death is the best card in the game. Maybe you like Obsidian Statue a lot better, or Free from Amber. I know a lot of people love Free from Amber. It doesn't matter, because you're going to need initiative to remove stuff. And if you don't have enough initiative to remove stuff, know that this is your chance to get it. And not in the rest of your draft, because of the way the buckets worked out. Like, this does not existent in the other draft. In the rest of the draft, you're going to end up with, like, taking Holy Fires, right? Like, how many times have I seen people be like, oh, I guess I need a Holy Fire now because we need some removal. It's a crappy removal. It's, like, a little over-bucketed. Like, why? You're doing it because you screwed up your top buckets. Because in your top buckets, you picked that Free from Amber instead of a Mind Control.
Right. I also see a lot of people pick Holy Water, right, in the third bucket.
It's one of the weaker cards in the third bucket, and really, like, you can do better. Like, almost every other card in the third bucket is better than that.
But, yeah, so it's also competing against Shadow Madness, and you pick a Shadow Madness every single time. But, you know, I do see people pick Holy Water quite a lot because, like you said, I think what's going through their mind is like, wow, I need this removal. Mm-hmm. And, look, it certainly works out pretty well sometimes because they're able to get the card, right? If they're able to kill it off, they're able to get the card as well. But yeah, if you just look down the list, it really sucks that priests have Shadow Word Death at the very top, right? You know, I
mean, it doesn't suck in that it should be. Shadow Word Death is literally the highest rated priest card we have.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Blizzard got it right. But that's the thing with their design of priests.
Yeah.
They're like top cards split into these two categories. One is all their ridiculous removals, and the other one is all their ridiculously large minions. And so you got to pick one or the other. And one of them you're not getting enough of in the rest of your draft. The other ones you can make up for with neutral cards, mostly. So, you know, which one are you going to take?
Right. Nothing replaces Shadow Word Death. But, you know, if you want a big thing, Vile Worm is pretty good, right? So
and underbucketed.
And extremely under, which is why you see it so often. So yeah, that's something which or, you know, like we talked about Bone Drake, that's in the fourth bucket, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, you want a big card?
Bone Drake, yeah. And like I just keep coming back, right? Especially Priest and Druid, but generally, like, big minions are on their way out. If you have a class that has the card draw aspect, you take the card draws over the big minions. And that was, I think, almost never true in prior metas. Because the big minions not only gave you card advantage, but also gave you tempo. And that was very much a bonus over just like pure card draw. But once the bucketing system kicked in, all of those card draw cards that we kept telling you guys, right? If you listen to the Lightforge, you know we've been pretty anti-card draw compared to most people for a long, long time. But now in 10.4, I think we were kind of vindicated when it came to the win rates because those card draw win rates were really not that great, and so they all got bucketed kind of low. But now we're with the card draws because they were bucketed kind of low, right? Like Thought Steal in the 5th bucket. Hey, I'd rather have Thought Steal in the 5th bucket and a Mind Control in the 1st bucket than, like, let's say a Spirit Lash in the 5th bucket and an Obsidian Statue in the 1st bucket. I would much rather have the Mind Control and the Thought Steal than a Spirit Lash and an Obsidian Statue. And they're the same 2 buckets.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it comes down to. So, once the bucketing system kicked in, the big minions, especially the big class minions that have all these, like, you know, that are lumped together with these, like, class spells, don't take them. They are the over bucketed ones. Whereas the removals, they're the ones that are correctly bucketed, and that's what you should be spending your top picks on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good. Good kind of rundown of what you should be looking out for with Priest, and also just a good explanation of why Priest is not that great anymore.
Yeah. Okay, so let's you have a question from the GOAT?
Sure. Question from the GOAT is kind of inspired by the recent brawl. So the recent brawl is Take Two, right? In which you essentially just take 2 cards, and then your deck is made up of only those 2 cards. It's 15 and 15. And people have a lot of fun with it. I mean, it's a completely broken format.
Yeah, I think HS Replay published the win rates, and it was just like Mana Worm plus any small spell for like the first like 4 or 5 positions of what works.
Mana Worm plus Arcane Missiles, right? And then, you know, people adjust and they have like really, really good counters to it as well, like Naturalize and Doomsayer. That's really good. But I was thinking, what do you think of a format in the arena that's not Take Two, but like you basically pick 10 cards, and for each one of those, it multiplies it by 3, you know? Would you be interested in seeing something like that, you know, as perhaps like a 1-week event? Or they've never done a side event, but I would like to see that, right? Maybe they could do a brawl like that.
Yeah.
I think that would be very cool. But anyways, what do you think about that? And also, like, if you don't like that idea, how would you tweak it to make it something you would like?
So I think it's a horrible idea when it comes to changing the arena like that, because what happens when you multiply every pick by 3 is you multiply the variance by, like, I don't know, 9.
Right. And obviously this is not a permanent thing.
Right. But even like as an event, it's like it'll be a total RNG fest of whether you get your synergies or not, right? Like think about a Dustbreaker that you happen to get with a dragon or 2 dragon picks, or the person who doesn't get it but pick the Dustbreaker with like just 1 dragon or no dragons. Like, yeah, it's gonna swing so hard. Like, it may be a fun brawl. I don't really know much about brawl. I almost never play brawls because they're kind of like all over the place, very rarely balanced, and they're done after a week, so I can't like become an expert in it. So it kind of like defeats all the purposes I have of playing this game. Of course, we know fun is not one of those purposes, so that's why I steer clear of brawl. And this very much sounds like a fun idea, right? Fun in very sarcastic quotes, because it's fun for some people, but not fun for others. And I fall in the very squarely in the others camp, right? Like if I look at something and go, well, this is kind of just silly. I don't really want to play it. I may like watch someone play it once, but like, or like I may dip my toe in it for like 1 session, and then I'm like, all right, I'm done. It feels like a very casual thing. Now, if it were constructed, right, where you get to pick, like actually pick the cards as you do for this brawl, then there's an element of skills to it. It's probably still very heavily imbalanced, but like then it'll at least be interesting, right? But I don't think this is a good thing for a limited format. I would steer very far away from that in designing something like that.
Yep. I think what'll make it interesting is it kind of flips a lot of what we know about the arena, right? So, for example, when you do something like this, it definitely can create consistency with like aggressive formats, right? And it also makes something like Ultimate Infestation not as good, right? It's like suddenly, you know, you pick 3 Ultimate Infestations at once. You're like, not too in love with this, right? You have the consistency, but at the same time, you your other two UIs are pretty dead. I think it would just be fun to see the rock, paper, scissors aspect of it. And obviously that is not sustainable for any long-term game mode.
Yeah.
But I think some people just like want to see the craziness, right? When they do something wacky, I want to see them do something like this in the brawl. I want to see them do something like this as like a side thing, just to get it out of the way. And then I want them to sort of keep the arena, you know, like to keep it going, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a good place in the arena when it comes to like messing around with it, right? Like they're actively in the process of messing around with it when it comes to the bucket system, and they keep tweaking it. And you know, they've made it very clear that we're the beta testers and we're testing the beta. And it's a decent game mode right now. Like I don't think the arena meta is terrible since the latest patch. Like I think this is actually like definitely in the top half of arena metas we've had, maybe even in the top 10% of arena metas we've had now, in terms of like how the arena interacts with you, what you can do with the deck, what you can influence in the game. Like I think we reached a pretty good balance where I don't know if we're like in a much better place than we were before, but we're certainly up there like compared to history. So I'm having fun in the arena itself.
Yeah. So I think a decent barometer to see sort of the health of the meta is to see what people are complaining about nowadays, right? And if you just look at the Arena HS subreddit, like the complaint du jour now is MCT, right? It's MCT, and it, we can laugh about it. And first of all, I think MCT is a little bit problematic.
And MCT, by the way, is next week's Card Good Bad.
It is.
So one thing I do want to point out with Card Good Bad is we now have it in our subreddit for the week before the Card Good Bad, and all discussions that people say on it, we'll read, and we'll respond to that in the next Lightforge.
Right.
So for next week, if you have your thoughts, your burning thoughts about MCT, go to our subreddit, the Grinning Goat subreddit, and vent a little. We're all.
But for the health of the meta, I want to say that I think it's telling that the complaint now is about a card that has existed, right? That has always been complained about, and it is a neutral card, right? So the complaint isn't something like that recently popped up, and it's not something that is like class specific, which is.
And it's not even like they misbucketed MCT. MCT is correctly bucketed.
Yeah,
like,
I'd say so.
I mean, I think that's part of the problem is it's under bucketed, probably for like average players. For good players, it's correctly bucketed. So what that means is probably that you should probably take MCT if you're like an average or slightly above average player, and you should like really only think about not taking the MCT if you're like a very good player, or if your strategy just involves being on the board a lot, right? Like, if you are a paladin for whom even if you MCT, you're not going to win if you lose the board, don't take the MCT. But otherwise, it's a very good pick right now. I don't know.
Yeah, and the better of the player you are, the more skewed your stats of like getting MCT'd versus doing the MCT. That is going to skew very heavily towards you getting MCT'd. The better you are, which is a cause of frustration.
Yeah,
but
finish your where you were going with that.
I think it's fine. Like when the sort of chief complaint is that I think we're okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Overall, in the big picture, if the chief complaint is a complaint that has been loud and clear since day one of the arena, you've done pretty well when it comes to balancing the arena at that point. At least it's definitely better than it was before, or else we'd all be complaining about the things that aren't better, which we were. And then they fixed it or mitigated a lot of the problems. Not saying it's perfect. There's ways to go. Power levels could still come down. I could rattle off a whole list. But if you really take a step back and look at the meta with other metas, we're doing okay right now. Like, in the big picture.
Agreed.
Okay, so that kind of moved into Card Good Bad from Question from the Goat. Question from the Goat is brought to us by our patrons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much. really means a lot to us. And we'll end this on our card good bad for this week, which has been for about a week now on our subreddit, and it is Ratcatcher.
The original
yeah.
post was made by Excellent80, and Excellent80's opinion is that they feel like, and this is their words, feeling like 112 is at least 20 points too low for this card. I've dropped it every time it's been offered to me, and it always gets crazy value. Gotta say, I'm 100% sure on this one. Think of it kind of like giving a minion Wind Fury +2/+2 and triggers Death Rattle for 3 mana.
Yeah, so that's not the way you think about it. And I'm going to break down how you should think about Ratcatcher right now, because you should not think about it as Wind Fury and +2/+2. Like, that's, like, you're not taking the downside into consideration here.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So here's Ratcatcher on a medium day. Ratcatcher on a medium day comes out, first of all, it's not a curve card usually, or it's like a curve card, right? You add 4 stats altogether for 3 mana. It's not a good curve card. On a good day, it comes out, it kills your minion that would have been eaten by the opponent's minion, and that makes your Ratcatcher big enough to eat the opponent's minion in reverse, right? Like, that's the ideal. That's the best day of Ratcatcher that does not involve an egg. Eggs make Ratcatchers amazing. But, eggs aside, in your best day, what you've done is, and you can math the stats out, but you basically saved half your stats, and then you've doubled your gains on your stats, and so you've got a 4x gain on the amount of stats. The stats you lose from a non-curve out 3 mana card. A non-curve out 3 mana card should be like a 4/4, if not a little larger than that, actually, because you lose your curve function, which is most of what a 3-drop is for. You have a 2/2, so you have 4 stats, and so to lose 4 stats, to gain 4 stats, you have to effectively eat 1 stat on the very bottom and make it useful. That's, like, very easy to accomplish if you can get that situation set up. On the other hand, if you can't get that situation set up, which you normally can't, like, that situation happens maybe once every, like, 4 turns or something. So you have a lot of delay happening, a lot of holding in your hand, a lot of a semi-dead card in your hand. Instead, the more frequent situation that gets set up is half of that. Meaning, you're saving a card and creating a big enough minion that doesn't get eaten but can't eat anything else either. So you've saved the stats on a card. Or you've eaten something that otherwise was going to trade with something else or basically be generally okay, but you've done it in order to eat a bigger or more threatening thing. Right? Like, you've turned existing stats onto the board into initiative or into double initiative, which is why the comparison is made to Wind Fury. But in that case, the stats only get doubled in terms of what you're getting back. So in that case, what you actually need to eat in terms of stats in order to make it worth it is you need to eat, like, of the functional stats, at least a 4/4's worth of stats. Like, yep. That's what makes it. So in the normal use case, you need to eat 4 stats and have it either be saving the stats or be using it to eat a minion that you otherwise could not eat with the Ratcatcher to make this card, like, function as a normal-ish card. That's not that hard to pull off, which is why we give Ratcatcher a 112. Like, you could pull that off probably, like, every other turn. But to get, like, the additional extra super value that you're talking about, it's hard. It doesn't even ever happen if you don't have the board. So you have to, like, kind of be fighting for the board or have the board. And on top of all that, like, you're missing a curve card in Warlock, which is, you're kind of, like, squeezing out, right? Like, you have to view Ratcatcher as an initiative card, but it's a situational initiative card. And are you really, like, what's the upside in this, right? Eggs aside. Like, are you really going to eat, like, instead of a 4/4's worth of thing, like an 8/8's worth of thing, and get the super value out of it? You're not going to do that. That's such a ridiculous setup that it won't actually, like, happen. So your upside for Ratcatcher is surprisingly limited on the what you eat side. It's only good, like, it's only getting the super extra value if you can both save and kill in which you otherwise couldn't.
Yep. Now, if we look at Ratcatcher, so that's basically the analysis of Ratcatcher as a card, right?
Right, like, that's like the bones, right? That's the bones of Ratcatcher, why it functions, why it's 3 mana, why it's a 2/2. Yeah, like that's the bones of it. That's what it's actually like doing. I'm not talking. I haven't looked at. Obviously, I haven't discussed. I keep saying like unless you're an egg, right? Like unless you have something with the death rattle, in which case
Right.
Ratcatcher becomes a pretty good synergy in it.
Definitely. And if we just look at the buckets for Warlock, we do see that Ratcatcher is in the sixth bucket, so the second to last bucket, right? So Xlen, when you say that you draft it a lot, I can see why,
I
right?
drafted a
It's
lot
not.
too. It's
Yeah,
good
I
for its
drafted
bucket.
a lot as well. Yep, it is a card in which it is very good for its bucket. Rush minions are just really, really good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with something like Ratcatcher, I'm surprised because Blizzard has, well, the first go around, they thought Rush minions were um,
The best
like not as
cards
good at.
ever.
Yeah, yeah, and then
Remember the
afterwards,
vicious whatever, the 1/3 2-mana charger that got bucketed in like the highest bucket or something.
yeah, that was weird. That was really.
Oh.
Anyways, I was surprised that like Ratcatcher is here, right? Because I would think by now they would understand how good
Mm-hmm.
like Rush is. But yeah, so it is definitely one of those cards in which you should be drafting quite a lot because it's up against like you know um Ravenous Pterodax, right? I'm just looking like
I
you have
like
a couple of
Pterodax. When
okay.
it comes to like eating something, like what would you rather do? Turn that into initiative or double adapt? I think it's kind of even.
Sure. But it's also up against like River Croc,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah, of course.
Um, just
Yeah.
just all of these like very meh kind of
I don't
cards.
know. I like Pterodax. It's a 4-mana 4/4, like at its base, right? Like it even is a
Sure,
curve card.
sure. But yeah, these are not sort of like the world beater cards that you're going to sacrifice in order to take the rat catcher. So yeah, when you say you take it almost every single time, like I could definitely see that.
Oh. Okay, so that's Ratcatcher. It's certainly an interesting card, but it's a well-made card, right? Like you take the ridiculous synergies aside, and it kind of just it feels good and right, and the right value that you should be playing. It's like playing a Yeti on turn 4. You're like, this is good. It's a well-designed card, but it's not a world beater. You're not getting a premium card with Ratcatcher. It's just a slightly under bucketed card, and that's why we rate it at a 112, and it's not going to move significantly up or down anytime soon. We like it where it's at.
Yep.
Okay, so that's it for the Lightforge for today. Next week we may talk about a couple more classes. And just so you know, the Lightforge next week is going to happen on Friday because of Memorial Day weekend in the U.S. After that, there will still be normal streams and all that, but Merps won't be around for the Lightforge, so we're recording live on Friday. And we'll see what we do there when it comes to the topic. And once again, the next card good bad will be discussed on the subreddit before it comes on the podcast. So that is MCT, and we will really dig into MCT next week. Yeah. Anything else you want to add?
No, that is it. Good discussion of those two classes, and stay tuned for the coming weeks where we talk about the other classes.
Yeah. Until next week, then. This is Adwicta.
This is Merps. Good luck in the arena, guys.